This program has been made possible in part by the following sponsors. The Trial Lawyers Association of BC. The Vancouver Courier newspaper. KCM Wealth Management. Well, late breaking news, ladies and gentlemen. You don't usually turn to this program for that sort of thing, but I tell you, there's just been a find, an archaeological dig in Abyssinia, where they found these peculiar thingamajigs, and apparently they, at one time, were known as bukes. And, of course, it seems odd now to look at such things, since every child for the last century or so has had his or her reader installed in his thumbnail at birth right after circumcision. But apparently that's how people, and as somebody pointed out here in the studio, what happens when you get to the bottom of a page? Were they well, I think they're called pages, or was it page, instructed to turn the page? All of which is to question what's happened to the world of publishing, and who better to ask than Alan Twigg, who is the publisher himself of BC BookWorld, among other things, but he's a man who's written a great many books and many television documentaries, and has won so many countless awards. We just take up the whole program going on about what a sweet fellow he is, but here he is in the flesh. So Alan, welcome. Is this what the future will be? They'll dig up these things and they won't know what they look like?
The book was always going to be with us. And the people predicting the demise of the book generally, if you look closely, have a self-interest in futurism and all these statistics coming at us saying the book is, there's usually an agenda behind all this propaganda telling us that the book is going to go the way of the dodo bird. It's not going to go the way of the dodo bird.
What's the current look? My understanding is that the Koodoos and the Kindles and so on are grabbing about 9 or 10% of the market.
You know, the number of ebooks that the library lends now is about maybe 2%, if that, of their circulation.
Oh, really?
Our statistics in Canada, who is they?
Yeah.
They say are always a year or two behind the United States. So what's happening now is we're looking in Canada to what's happening in the United States, and we get all these statistics from very big companies in the United States saying, well, this is the way the world is turning, and we must automatically obey what the futurists in the United States are saying about their large companies, and this is inevitably going to happen in Canada.
But you're saying it's all marketing.
I'm saying I'm a library trustee now, and so I'm almost on a daily basis sent news stories about the future of books, and they're almost all telling us we must change very, very quickly into this new world of the e-universe, and you're going, well, hold on, there's all these people who don't want that to happen. We brought in about 20 young teenagers, I would say, 15-year-olds, into our library board meeting from all around the city, and they were well-read kids, and we asked them, well, you know, how many of you are reading Kobos, and how many of you prefer books? Thinking, of course, that the new young generation would all be tuned into their tablets, their Kobos.
Sure.
Every one of those kids said, no, I only read books.
Really?
Yeah.
That's amazing. And cheerful for an old fogey like me. But I do notice, Alan, I'm a guy of certain habits, and one of them, one of the few we can talk about publicly, is that I love to sit at a cafe and drink espresso and read a book. And even this morning I was doing such a thing, and people were walking by and going somewhere between staring and glaring, and I'm wondering which one of us is in the zoo.
Yeah, and obviously you have to look at it from an age perspective. You go into a cafe, the majority of people are now either on phones or on laptops, and the people who are reading books maybe 1 in 5, maybe 1 in 6. BC Ferry is a bit different, but nonetheless, riding a BC Ferry gives you what the whole populace is doing, not just what a little social set is doing. And when I ride on a ferry, I always look and see how many tablets there are versus how many books.
And what's your sense of
Well, the books are still outnumbering the tablets, but it's an economic thing too. The people who can afford tablets are a certain class of society. So yes, we're going to end up having obviously e-books and real books. But the uglification of reading, which is what I call this e-book phenomenon.
The what of reading?
The uglification.
Uglification.
Of reading. I was at the Matisse exhibit today. And there was a nice still life he did of an empty chair and a table, and on the table is this open white book. And maybe 100 years from now, someone will look at a famous painting from our time, and there'll be a nice a silver laptop on the table, and maybe it will resonate the same way to that person. But at the moment, I'm just going to say I don't think so.
Just a minute, I'm getting a message from my thumb screen.
It's not that I'm saying I'm against all e-technology. I'm against this bombardment of in the media saying we must also, whatever new technology exists, we must automatically jump to that technology.
Are you seeing, I know that you know every publisher in town and probably most of the publishers in Canada, are you seeing publishers scurrying to the e-trough?
Well, everybody's going crazy going, well, we have to switch over, but how do we make any money doing it?
Exactly.
This morning I was at a very large company and their conventional printing operation. They make all their money off of conventional printing. They're employing 50 people to try and figure out how they can make money by doing things electronically. And the 50 people are being paid. So far, the amount of money they have raised is zilch. But everybody is so convinced that we must make this transition that people are trying to find some way of making it economically viable. And possibly all these publishers are now spending all this time figuring out how to not only do a book, but then it has to be an e-book. Nobody has figured out the scenario whereby libraries can effectively buy books in bulk without remunerations to authors, etc. It's a big trial balloon.
Because I'm a rich and famous television personality, I get to go to places like Maui, so I was there recently, and I was shocked and horrified to realize that while there had been 3 bookstores for quite some many years, there's now only a Barnes & Noble out on the highway as you leave Lahaina towards the north end. Apparently, 2 or more of the others were Barnes & Nobles, but there's now 1 bookstore, and of course we have the whole story with what's-his-face closing down the book warehouses, although 1 apparently is being saved.
Well, you know, we don't have to go to Hawaii to look at this phenomenon of the disappearing bookstore. The problem there is if the bookstores disappear, then where will the conventional publishers be selling their books?
Yes, exactly.
They may end up selling their books directly to the consumer in the same way that right now, when you want a book, you go on your computer, maybe get it from Amazon, maybe from Abe Books, and that book will arrive at your doorstep in 3 or 4 days. That's pretty good, better than parking, etc. So that is contributing to the demise of the bookstore big time, but the book is still being read. So, and also the property values in Vancouver make it very difficult to run a bookstore. That's a factor.
Yeah, the rents are immense.
But that doesn't. But you're still ordering a book. So if we're talking about the object of the book, that is the object that you're going to give to your loved one for a present. Still, maybe 50 years it'll change, but right now people still prefer that
in almost any aspect of journalism, we always say follow the money. So, you know, really my intention was the first question I was going to ask you, but we jumped somewhere else. But it's all in the same path. What are the revenues that we know of for paper book publishing compared to?
One of the big, I helped the Writers Union draft a sort of a 10 commandments of how can writers make money in this new e-universe? Can we trust publishers to cut us in? Publishers are no longer paying for warehousing in this futuristic world, warehousing, shipping, printing. So why should they continue to get 90% of the cost?
Just explain that to everybody. Why are they no longer paying for that?
Well, in the eventual world where if we eliminated the book and we're only dealing with so-called e-books, then why would the publishers continue to get 90% of the revenues from those sales?
But even with print books, Amazon and others are saying, if I self-published with Amazon, they're saying, you could order 100 at a time. We'll print them as you need them.
These days, we never question these statistics. For instance, I was at a conference and they just said, oh, the average self-published book sells 12 copies as an ebook. Now, and you immediately grasp onto that idea. If you like that statistic, you grasp onto a statistic. And all these statistics are flying at us. We're not being very critical about where this information is coming from, either whatever side you're on. And so really, nobody knows. And the big publishers don't know. Even some of the biggest publishers are now refusing to sell ebooks to libraries until they can figure out an economically viable scenario. So yes, the technology exists, but does that necessarily mean we have to go with this technology?
When you think about the internet explosion in the 90s and how everybody and his cousin was investing millions, I mean, I knew one guy who was like, he was a genius, and he raised 50 million like that for some e-enterprise, and within a year and a half, it had folded its tent. You know, it was gone in the sand. It was finished. And now Facebook does their IPO, and I think millions of people were laughing because it was predictable that it would lose value within days.
There's what is Chapters doing selling Kobos? That would be like if you're in the horse and buggy age and you want to encourage people to test drive cars. And yet our media is quickly, the publishers or newspapers are now online. Well, that's not going to help you sell it on the street corner. And so they're putting it online without having a scenario as to how to make revenue from that product.
But they're also very much like car sellers, because car sellers make a lot of money on all the little accessories and toys and sidebar things, right? Mirrors that do tricks and jump up and down at you. So Kobo, of course, and Kindle and tablets, there must be a lot of money in all these accessories, the leather packaging, and the thing
people
that
are
stands
hoping and
up
thinking that all these things are going to happen, but it's not. We don't know. I mean, the Sun or Province, one of those will have to go. The only way that most of these little papers can make money now is with their inserts. And then they say, okay, it's the demise of print advertising. This is now the statistics in the States show demise of 68%. Therefore, it's all going to fall down. I have as many ads in BC BookWorld as I've ever had.
Really?
But nobody's interviewing me about that. All you hear is this story over here.
Okay. We'll take a little break and remind you that davidberner.com is the site to go to for whatever reason. Of course, allegedly, you can follow us on Facebook and Twitter, but the truth is I don't pay a lot of attention, even though they're there, and we will attend, but you can send comments and so on. But also, we take a break to say hello and thanks to the lovely people who allow us to bring you this half hour here on Shaw Community Television, Cable 4. Back in a minute. This program is made possible in part by the following sponsors. The Vancouver Courier newspaper. KCM Wealth Management. The Trial Lawyers Association of BC. Now, I do want to make note that we have a wonderful new sponsor, the Trial Lawyers Association of BC, and I was very happy to see the president or chairman of the, help me, BC Civil Liberties Association is an important member of the Trial Lawyers Association. I saw them at their 50th party the other night. Trial Lawyers Association of BC, you may say right away, well, what's David doing cozying up to all those corporate lawyers? Wrong again, Bunky. BC Trial Lawyers Association has a volunteer membership, 1,400 people strong, legal professionals located throughout the province, practicing a diverse range of areas. Many members have a mixed practice. Common characteristic is they represent individuals more than corporations, governments, or other large groups. Practice areas include family, employment, immigration law, wills, estates, criminal defense, personal injury litigation, Association is a not-for-profit society with 32 years of history to its credit. Members are united with goals of protecting the rights of individuals, ensuring access to court, preserving the jury system, maintaining the highest standards in legal education for their profession. Of course, they do tons of pro bono work, so we're delighted that they've embraced this program. Thank you very much, and welcome aboard. So back to Alan Twigg and the publishing world. Look, book publishing in Canada is reputed to be a $2 billion business, pushing 200 million in this province. But what you're seeing is that the revolution in e-booking is not chewing up a lot of that revenue.
No, but the sky is not falling at the same time. I know one of the larger local firms told me that they've sold more books this year than they ever had.
Yes.
So the BC book publishing industry is extremely viable because there's no fat on it, and it hasn't been dependent on grants as much as other provinces. And so people who make books here know what they're doing. They've been doing it for 25 or 30 years, and they know how to survive on very little. And we have, if you read the statistics from Federal Service, and I don't necessarily buy into every statistic that comes away, but it's been shown that BC has the highest book reading rate per capita in the country.
Really?
So we're a highly literate society. We're a success story in terms of our literature.
When you look at some of the publishing houses, it's kind of amazing to see that there are people here in BC, like Howard at Harbour and Brian at Arsenal, and all these characters who've been at this for 30 years at a time. I mean, I know when some of these guys first started, and they're still at it. They're still churning out original new material.
And that's how I make a living making a newspaper about those books. And there are so many people in this province, all over the province, and the more you go beyond the urban-centric world, the more those people read and the more they appreciate the culture that we have here. And we do have a really interesting society in British Columbia, and the books reflect that. And if you're, just look at the number of books that have been published about First Nations materials from British Columbia in itself have been instrumental in the social changes that have gone. Without all those books from UBC Press, Douglas and McIntyre, Harbour Publishing, Talon Books, 5 or 6 really good books every year, we would not have had the change in consciousness that we've had. So our book industry has been incredibly progressive and useful. As if you might sort of say, well, and compared to what? The film industry? Has the film industry had the same impact on British Columbia as the book industry? No. How much money, though? The book industry gets very little, and yet they do a lot.
And they're uniquely focused on the things that are very particular and special about this climate, about this environment. I mean, so many of the publishers do stories, publish books about some guy's fishing boat and somebody's pet bear and so on.
And this is why there's all grounds for anxiety about if we go into the new EU universe, the way that those libraries or bookstores buy books, they do so-called aggregators, put together large compilations of titles. We're talking like hundreds or thousands of titles, and then with a click of the button, sell 1,000 titles. Well, therefore, in that world, if you're not part of some aggregator's little corral, you're not going to be represented. So the idea that the internet or ebook world is going to be more democratic, and yes, you can have your little self-published book somewhere on the internet, but is it going to be widely circulated? Is that local book on the history of Prince Rupert going to be aggregated by the big company in the United States called Overdrive, which is the main company now that sells ebooks to Canadian libraries? We don't have a Canadian distributor yet for e-titles, so therefore, if you're not in Overdrive's corral, you're going to cease to exist. Whereas right now, we have access to all those books, like the history of Prince Rupert.
In the world of show business and entertainment, there's a kind of a flattening out effect universally, especially from our big cousin to the south. So everything in television is going to look approximately the same. And so much in the movies and often in music is going to sound and look so much the same. But when we have so much publishing here, for example, I see this also in the prairies in Ontario, and I'm sure it must be in Quebec, that is so specific to Northwest culture. You know, does anybody ever, are there very many books that jump out of the province?
Okay, in British Columbia, not so much.
Yes.
And you can say there are certain books that you can't do from here very well.
Like?
Well, for instance, BC publishers don't do a lot of fiction. Bizarrely, more BC fiction writers are published in the prairies than in BC. So there's strange little things like that. But I mean, we're so well served here that people now take it for granted. But you have to look back to the 50s or 60s. We've gone from famine to feast in half a lifetime. The remarkable growth of our publishing and writing world. I have 10,000 BC-related authors on a website. So we are culturally a huge success story.
And that's of every kind.
And there are grounds for worrying that unless government recognizes the importance of maintaining this publishing industry, with the technological changes that I'm describing, where other people are going to be pushing buttons, making decisions on what you have access to outside of our national borders, you know, we are in danger of losing something very very positive that people probably don't recognize.
Well, we like to talk politics on this show, so what are you talking about? Are you saying that the BC government does and or should be investing more in publishing?
Historically, when you look at the support that has been given to writing and publishing in British Columbia, in comparison to other provinces, and if you took all the numbers and did it back 30, 40 years, you'd find that we are not on the avant-garde of funding. But an argument can be made that's been a good thing because it's actually forced our publishers to be more inventive and more entrepreneurial. So, you know, you can look at it two ways.
Which is a good thing. So is there some, are there lobby groups? Are there people who keep pestering the government and saying, give us a bit more money?
Well, you
know,
and
if we did, what would we do with the money?
We did have a premier who was going around saying he wanted BC to be the most literate place in Canada. Well, it already was. But it is arguably one of the most literate places in North America already. So the question is, what are we going to do to preserve that?
You know, you mentioned Aboriginal culture and Aboriginal people. One of the guests we had on this show was Calvin Heelan, and Calvin is an Aboriginal lawyer who did a kind of unique thing. He got rejected, just like Walt Whitman and everybody else, by 30 publishers. So he took out a second mortgage on his house and published this book called what? Dancing with Dependency, or Dancing with Dependency, I think. And started selling it out of the trunk of his car. He printed it at Friesens in Manitoba, right? And then he printed it he sold it out of his car. Guess what? Paid off the second mortgage, paid off the first mortgage, and now he's on his fourth book, and he's in demand all over the world.
There are lots of stories like that. You have to believe in yourself before anybody else is going to believe in you. And interesting, the majority of the publishing houses in British Columbia are probably started by writers. In other words, they didn't want to go through the gatekeeper in Toronto either. You couldn't get to the gatekeeper in Toronto. And so, hey, I'm going to do it myself. That whole maverick sensibility of the British Columbian do-it-yourselfer is actually at the heart of the majority of the publishing firms in British Columbia started from that same ethos of that character saying, you know what, I'm doing it myself. So it's there's a lot of people like that, and British Columbia has always been at the forefront of self-publishing, and now that self-publishing is becoming more respected, we've always been doing that because we didn't have access to the Toronto guys. So you can get a book printed here, either at Morris Printing in Victoria or Mitchell Press in Vancouver. So we have a tradition of doing it ourselves.
I know somebody who just had a book launch recently, very successful book launch, and got a tremendous review in The Sun of her new novel, which, by the way, has a sort of Aboriginal setting. And I haven't read the book yet, so I can't comment.
Is that Leslie Hall-Pinder?
Yes, exactly.
Okay, yeah, she's written 3 novels. She's from Saskatchewan originally.
Yeah.
But she's been Union of BC Indian Chiefs. I think she represented them in land claims for 30 years.
Yeah,
so
she's a lawyer.
Stuff to write about.
Yeah. So, but one of the interesting things about her approach is that, among other things, of course, she's used the internet, and she has a separate website for every one of her books.
Well, the authors are looking at this more increasingly, saying, why do we even need publishers? But, you know, publishers are needed just like librarians are needed. We need gatekeepers in our society, and sometimes the gatekeepers are called critics, and nobody likes critics.
Yes.
But well, like it or not, publishers have a huge role in separating wheat from chaff, and yes, they sometimes don't do a good job of it, and yes, they make human errors, and somebody can write a...
And yes, they take a big chunk of the price.
Yes, but nonetheless, the learning how to publish a book properly, yes, somebody can do it well themselves, and more people are doing it well because you can manage the technology on your own now, and this may be the future, but nonetheless, publishers do have by learning over a 30-year period, what's the bookseller going to like, or what's the librarian going to like? The publishers have a role to play.
And then all kinds of interesting new people have emerged to fill in those gaps, like the people that did the launch or did. I think they put the book together for Leslie Pender, Gray. I've lost her name. They.
She's not a nobody. She's got a track record.
No,
she already did three. She did a book with Talon Books about 25 years ago, a novel. So she's not a nobody.
No, she's
got lots of connections.
Represented by a huge agency in Toronto.
And she's got a lot of chutzpah. I remember. I think the story about her was she was the first female lawyer in a big law firm in Vancouver, as I recall. And they were holding meetings at a men's club, and she was told to go into the servants' exit, the entrance, and she walked in the main entrance, and she was gone from the firm the next day, and that started her off on her career.
I'm sure. Alan, great to talk to you.
Good to talk to you, David.
We'll hope that these crazy things keep coming out.
Books are going to continue.
They're going to continue. Okay, I'm glad to hear that. All right, folks, that's it for us. Just a reminder that next week Elizabeth Murphy is joining us. She doesn't have a fancy title, but she is, because of her background working with the city and so on, she is a critic and an observer of what we do with our city, and in particular with housing concerns. And we're going to focus next week on the rental housing stock here on the David Byrne Show. Thanks so much for being with us, and thanks to Shaw Community Television Cable 4. Good night.